I've been in this field for about 35 years, so I've seen a lot of technologies and innovations come and go, and seen a lot of mistakes made over time. And I think we've got the opportunity to avoid some of those mistakes because we are at the beginning of this for kids, because the devices still are not recommended for children by and large, the VR devices. Most of my talk will be focused more on the VR side than the AR side. And here are the 5 things that I want to address. VR has arrived several times as the next big thing, and every time something has gotten in the way to have it fade away. The technology isn't right, the timing isn't right, the cost is too much, and all that. And there are still things out there now. We think that it may be arriving now, but there are still things out there now that could kill this medium, especially for kids and families. So starting with false promises, that's a platform and a content thing. I have never seen this slide, anyone else use this slide before, and then of course Justine used it yesterday. I don't know where she found it, but she beat me to it. Every time a technology comes along, we market it first to families as how great it's going to be for kids. Oh, you got to get television because it's going to bring all kinds of educational content. You got to get cable TV, channels and channels of educational content. You got to get a computer. You've got to get the internet. Every time we go first to the parents, and once the technology is pretty firmly embedded in the population, it's kids. Oh, well, they're not a very profitable audience, so forget about kids. We're going to do stuff for others. We have the chance now, because kids are lagging behind this time, because they are not recommended for VR, we have the chance to do this right, to actually figure out what this medium does well before we start that marketing to kids and to make it, or to families, and make it a more honest conversation with them. The same thing has always existed in content marketing as well. We are very quick to tell parents, oh, you've got to buy this, to play on their guilt and say, you've got to buy this product. Your kid is going to be smarter. Your kid is going to get into Harvard. Your kid is going to be able to read when they're still a baby. And it's when we make those promises that we get in real trouble as an industry, because we cannot back up most of those promises with research. My usual advocacy is for flipping that, is for instead of talking about what kids will learn from something, which is a complex ecosystem learning, if we talk about what we intend to teach, that conveys intent. If we say, here's what went into my product, here's what goes into my technology, here are the assumptions that I've made, and let parents make the choices about how best to use it and whether it's right for their families. We've talked a little bit about ethical design. I just dropped this slide in here now because I'm not sure all of you know about this. There's an interesting concept called a talkoot. It's a Finnish concept. And last year they held a talkoot. It's a gathering of people around a particular question. So they spend a couple days focused on something. Last year in Finland, there was a talkoot around ethical design in children's media. They came out with the Designing for Children's Rights Guide. The follow-up convening is happening in Copenhagen in January. Here are the URLs, and I'm happy to send them to anyone if you don't get them right now, for how to read the design guide that they've written so far, this first draft, but also how to join in with the group that's organizing it. Many of you know Shuli Galut's researcher, she's one of the main organizers of it. Mistake number 2, lack of compelling content. I have actually been in the middle of one of these Alphonse and Gaston problems, and it's really not a pretty place to be. So the industry, the hardware industry says, well, we're not making the devices until there's more content out there for people to buy them. Or at least the families say, we're not buying the devices until there's more content out there for us. And meanwhile, the industry says, well, we're not making more content until there's an embedded layer of devices so that there's actually an audience out there. That goes back and forth, and nobody ever wins. Big question for VR, AR, MR, what's sticky? I've seen a whole lot of stuff that I am happy to do once. I'm happy to ride a VR roller coaster one time. The second time, I know what's coming. The third time, The people we work with at LEGO talk about the 10th use. You're always wanting to be designing for the 10th use. And I will tell you, based on the really, really early results from Dubbett's work, putting devices in homes and watching how families use VR once they have free access to it, A lot of anticipation. They love the idea that it's coming. First engagement, they're really excited about it. And by about 2 weeks later, they are back to playing their regular games, being on their phone. Some of that has to do with my parents need to set it up every time I want to use it, and it's much more wonky to use and that. But if we are not designing for the 10th use, if we're not coming up with uses for VR and AR that are going to last through time, one of the worst things that can happen, I think, is for a kid to come to a parent and say, I need money to buy this VR experience, and come back 10 minutes later and say, I need money for another, I'm bored. Parental math, that ties in very much to this idea of the financing, of the money of it. Dovett works with something we call the trust zone that came out of some research we were doing with how parents make decisions about when to say yes to content. On the right side, you see if a parent says, that's something I kind of like to do, like Jason's talk yesterday about Pokemon Go, if they think, I could get engaged with that, or I'm happy to sit down and watch that with my kid, they're much more likely to say yes. If they see the benefit to the child, and that doesn't just necessarily have to be educational benefit. It's not, I see that my child learns something from that. It makes my kid laugh. It makes them giggle. They go out and they explore something new after doing this. I see the benefit of that. And if you're in that upper right quadrant, so how do we put VR in that upper right quadrant of parents saying, this is something I'd love to engage with, and I can see that it's something good for my kid. And here's where we are with that right now. This is Dovett's most recent research on kids and families and VR, what parents say about it. It's those bottom two lines that I'm looking at. 54%, just over half of parents say they don't yet see a practical use for it. They're not convinced that this is something they need in their homes. And an even larger percent think it's only for gamers. If it's only for gamers, they're not going to buy in unless their kid is a serious gamer. Unless they're a serious gamer, they get it for themselves. They pass it on to the child.
Do you know the strongly versus the somewhat in that?
I don't. I can look it up, but I don't. We've talked a lot about fairness and sustainability. There have been a lot of headlines over the last couple of weeks about the presence of advertising in children's apps, about the presence of in-app purchases. What is a fair, for kids and parents, way to fund content in VR and AR that is also sustainable for developers? Because frankly, if nobody's developing for it, you can't get quality content. And if nobody can make a living at it, a fair living at it, they're not going to be designing for it. Right now, we have a crisis in the app world with exactly that there is no fair and sustainable model right now for that. Oddly, we've gone from parents saying, yeah, I'll pay $50 for a console game, to parents complaining about 99 cents for an app. If they're not going to spend the cost of a latte to buy a decent app outright so that you don't have to have advertising in it, we've got a real problem. Is it going to be subscriptions? I'm very worried about subscription fatigue. You buy Amazon for the shipping and you get some good content along with it. You buy Netflix for yourself and your kid, and you keep it for your kids, because if you cancel Netflix and their favorite shows go away, they scream. If you buy a couple other subscriptions for your kids or for yourself, pretty soon you start looking at the bottom line and saying, I'm spending a lot more on this than I thought I was going to. So where is immersive media going to fit into that? Mistake number 4 is, that's nice, and what else does it do? I found this the other day. This is from The Onion. The idea. Yeah, we've got so many devices that we're trying to incorporate into our lives. We need something for that moment when we look from here to here, just to fill that little space. But there's a big feeling right now, I think, of I've already got one of those. And VR and AR are going to have to fit, the devices themselves are going to have to fit into that. It's going to have to be a yes and technology. If it only does what we already have devices to do, then it's not going to succeed. It's always going to have to say, it does that, and here's what it does different or better than anything else that you have access to. And mistake number 5, very quickly, is the school turkey drop. We all saw it with the iPads into the Los Angeles schools. Throw technology at a school and say, here, figure it out. 3 key challenges, and I think we've talked a lot about these, so I'll do them very quickly. We talked a lot about them yesterday. One is equity. The future is already here, it's just not evenly distributed. I heard someone at one of the tables say yesterday, yeah, well, we know which libraries are going to get VR devices. We know where it's going to be centered, and we know who's not getting it as well. How do we create an equitable world where there is access for all? curriculum, avoiding the VCR card effect. I guess I'm old enough that it wasn't a VCR, it was just a television being wheeled into the classroom and everyone goes, all right, day off, we're gonna watch video. If that happens with VR and AR, if it just becomes a day off as opposed to being really integrated into curriculum, then it's gonna fail. There's a 90-second video from Google Expeditions that I love because it shows in just 90 seconds how it's integrated into the curriculum, how the teacher sets up the situation, then says, okay, now pick up the device, and then there are expectations clear from the beginning of what the children will be responsible for when they come out of the VR experience, what questions they'll be asked when they come out. And because it's 360, kids will have had very different experiences in that time. And so they'll come out not having all seen the same thing or what a director wanted them to focus on, but having each seen something different and compare and contrast. And finally, teacher buy-in and training. This was from a teacher that my wife taught with, said, I don't like having a smart board that's smarter than me. If we don't take the time to get them to buy in from the start and ensure that they have the training they need to make smart use of new technologies, then it will fail. That is it for me. Thank you.
Wow.